Hello, everybody. How's it going? Didn't expect to be doing a YouTube this soon, but I think this idea is very interesting, and I'd love to talk about it and see what everybody else's opinion is. Pretty controversial and not for the faint of heart. It's a very big binary that is going to move in a huge way in the upcoming weeks. So let's talk about AXSM, and I'm going to talk about Magnachip after AXSM is over. The Magnachip is going to focus on, I got a bunch of pushback in Value Investors Club, and I just want to share some of my thoughts on that. And I also went back through the proxy in pretty big detail to see who the previous bidders were and just give you some color on that as well. AXSM. They have a drug for depression that is basically a mixture of two drugs, and they put them together and made this new formulation. You're not going to hear much about the dynamics of the drug from me, as usual. All I will say is that the trials were very successful. There was no AdCom, and it had breakthrough designation therapy. It's not my belief that this drug was controversial outside of the fact that it's two drugs put together to make this new drug. I think it's Robitussin and something else. They had a PDUFA date in August, and when they reported earnings the first week of August, they disclosed in the press release of their earnings a bombshell that said that the agency has identified deficiencies with the filing, and it will preclude marketing discussions. Usually when that happens, in fact, almost every time it's ever happened, a CRL comes on the PDUFA date. The PDUFA date came, and there was no decision by the FDA. Then, in the middle of October, we got a press release saying that they had modified their credit agreement to allow for a much larger amount of money to be released upon the approval of this drug. It's known as 05. They have another drug that has a PDUFA date in April, which is not as important, known as 07. And in that credit agreement, they lowered the amount of money they will get upon an 07 approval. And overall, the whole thing increased by 50 million. Now, there is no risk to the creditor because if the drug's not approved, they won't release the money. Okay, that was middle of October, about 10 weeks after the letter, they received the letter about deficiencies or notification deficiencies, and about 8 weeks after the PDUFA date. In the beginning of November, they reported earnings, and they said that at the end of October, so just a couple weeks earlier, a week earlier, they got a deficiency letter, and the deficiency letter said that there were two issues with the analytics of the composition of matter or who the fuck knows, but it was not in regards to clinical profile, and it wasn't CMC per se. The exact language, you can see it in the press release, and you should go and also read the conference call from that day. It's very important. But the exact language was basically, we have to get back to the FDA and make sure we know exactly what they want. And once we know what they want, from today, we think we can resolve this within weeks to months, near to midterms, what they said. They were very clear in this letter. They were very clear on the earnings day that this specific request from the FDA was very addressable, and they did not think that this was going to prevent approval. That said, they were not sure that this issue was the same issue that they alluded to in July. Maisie? And as of then, the only deficiencies they were aware of were the deficiency that they reported to the market that day. Okay. You then fast forward to today. Well, last week, there was a note that came out that said, oh boy, this is going to be hard for me to pay attention to this. Hold on one second. Well, it's going to be what it's going to be. So last week, they did they had a sell-sider put out a note. They didn't have them do that, but they clearly were talking to investors. I know of an investor they spoke to, and they reiterated their time frame, but said it was kind of out of their hands. The FDA is very backlogged, and at that point, it's up to the FDA when they respond. They had not told the sell side or my friend, as far as I'm aware, that they had submitted the data already. Today, they put out an 8K, and the 8K flat out says, we have responded to the FDA for their request for information for these two issues, and we are not currently aware of any other deficiencies outstanding. The stock is flat in like the worst freaking biotech tape that ever existed. So there's a lot to break down here, but I started buying this last week. Actually, I did a YouTube last week, and someone asked me if I owned it, and I did not own it when I did the YouTube. But I started buying it the next day, and I bought a lot today. And this is a very risky position. So, I probably have 500 basis points in total exposed to this, maybe a little more than that. So I own a lot of call spreads, and I own some common. The call spreads I like are March 40 or 45 bottom strike, 60, 65 top strike. You could decide how aggressive or cautious you want to be, but 40 60s or 45 65s. The 45 65s are going for like 255, and the 40 60s are going for like 325. Your risk with the call spreads is this biotech tape is so bad that I do not know where this goes on approval. In the past, a buddy of mine thought this went to 100 on a very good label. Today, I'd probably be happy with 50, given how, a bunch of a disaster this tape is. So obviously doing a 45, 65 call spread, if you go to 50, it's not going to do much for you, which is why I also own the common. On the downside, if this gets CRL'd, they'll need cash, and they'll have to do a capital raise deep in the hole, and this thing can go to $10, go to $5. It really can get destroyed. So you should assume a huge capital loss if they do get CRL'd. Today's 8K means they respond today, or that they're just putting it out there that they responded. David, that's a great question. I think it means they responded in the last 5 days. Seems odd to me that they would put that out there if they respond in the middle of December. I don't know why they or the lawyers would decide that they had to put that out there now. A friend of mine is hypothesizing that maybe they disclosed something on one of the calls last week, and to cover their ass, they're now putting out the 8K. But to me, it seems fair. It seems fair to say that they probably responded in the last week, but it's unknown. Now, regarding timing goes, there's just a lot. There's a lot of psychology behind all this. Okay, so I'm gonna take a step back. So when they got the letter in July, it said that they could not go into marketing or labeling discussions. Okay, today, as we sit here, obviously AXSM knows that Axsome. I'm so bad at pronouncing these names. Axsome. Obviously, Axsome knows today if they've gone into labeling discussions or not. Okay, and I'm not going to get into the weeds of the July letter, but the bulls think that letter had nothing to do with negative deficiencies. It had more to do that there was clinical data that came out in other trials related to this drug, and the FDA did not have enough time to review it. And instead of giving them a major amendment, they issued this letter, which stops the clock and makes it to where that they're not in trouble for missing the PDUFA date. I have no idea if that's true or not, okay? But I will back into what I believe is bullish regarding that July letter. As we sit here today, what has happened since July? Okay. In the middle of October, they redid this credit facility. And I think we can safely assume that the company would not have redid that credit facility the way they did it if they believed a CRL was coming. That doesn't mean that one won't come, but there's no benefit for them to remove capital from 07 approval and give it to them at 05 approval if they believe that that July letter, which at that point and to today, they do not know what the deficiencies were in that letter, right? They have not been given details of what the FDA was referring to as deficiencies that preclude labeling. In fact, that could be the letter that came at the end of October with more detail of the deficiencies. The company simply does not know. What they did say today was that there are no other deficiencies outstanding that they are aware of. It's my belief that if today they had not started labeling discussions, that 8K would look differently. I do not think they would have put that sentence in that there were no deficiencies that they were aware of. I think the FDA, after all of these months since August of their PDUFA missing, would have made it clear that there were other outstanding issues. And that leads me to another point. If the July letter was a deal breaker and the FDA was going to CRL, A, why didn't they CRL in August like they do 99% of the other times? And B, why would they put this give them this letter at the end of October stating 2 specific deficiencies and having them address it? The only way you can come to terms that that has nothing to do with the July letter is that the FDA all got in a room months after the PDUFA lapsed in the middle of October and said, all right, well, we're giving this thing a CRL on these other issues, but we can't decide how bad the CRL should be. So let's tell the company they have deficiencies on these issues. We won't even mention the ones that are definitely giving them a CRL. Once we get the response to these issues, the late October letter, depending on how they respond, that's how we will form our CRL. Will it include these and these, or will it just include these? And that seems very far-fetched to me. Okay. Yes, it has to be a complete response, of course. But if they already had the inkling to CRL and they had the confidence to CRL based on that July information, they just CRL. It doesn't make any sense to me why they would then give the company more months to address this separate issue that bears think has nothing to do with the CRL that's coming from July. Further, I don't think the company puts in the 8K today that they're not aware of any other deficiencies if they're sitting here in the middle of January and haven't entered labeling discussions. It's my belief the labeling discussions might have started months ago, and the label might even be completely wrapped up. All that was left was for them to assuage the FDA's concerns about this specific issue. Now, I'm not going to read quotes from the conference call, but if you read the conference call, like I said, and you trust the company, and part of my bullishness on this is my friend knows the management team very well and says they're extremely trustworthy and also are very, very careful with Reg FD. So there's not been whispering going on from the company to investors. If you believe the company to their word, and you can't always do it with biotech, of course, there's no reason to believe that the issues in the late October letter are not addressable. I think I would put it at a 95% delta that those issues are addressable. So all you're left with is is there something else going on here, back to that July letter, that will CRL it? Why did they miss the PDUFA date? Why did the company amend the credit agreement in the middle of October? They know more than we know. Okay, they intimately know what's going on with this process. Now you could still be blindsided, of course, but if you have a hunch that you're going to get CRL'd, you're not amending your credit agreement to get less money on approval of the 07 product in April versus the 05 product that might be years delayed, and they need money. And then there was also an insider buy. I forgot about that. There was a small insider buy after the earnings came out. I guess they thought they disclosed everything they needed to disclose, right? They told us that they got a deficiency letter. The deficiency letter is fully addressable, and they have no idea what the July deficiencies were about. So in their mind, I guess they were clear to buy. They didn't buy a lot. Let me see how much they bought. I don't like those token insider buys. They really bother me. But by the way, this management team also has never sold, right? Very bullish on their company. The stock went to over 100 and nothing was sold. Let's see here. Where are the insider trades here? If 300,000 is 300,000, if that's what they bought, I mean, that's not terrible. I've seen way worse than that. Let's see. There were purchases by 3 different people. 100,000 by a director, 30,000 by an officer, and then 150,000. Sorry, then 50,000 by another director, and then 100,000 by another director. 4 different people insider bought this. Okay. Again, they're not insider buying if they're sure a CRL is coming. It doesn't do any good. There's no point of propping up a stock for a capital raise when there's no capital raise coming. Yeah, Glenn, I know. I don't know why I do it like this. I just got excited. I got excited about the news this morning. So I wanted to do the YouTube because of the news. You can always watch it on delay, obviously. But I realized that, and I don't want to have a standing YouTube like every week because I don't plan on doing these every week. It has to be a reason for me to do them. So that's the reason why I don't have a standing, slot. So all that put together, where are we? So the FDA could decide within a matter of weeks if they already done labeling discussions. If the FDA is planning on CRLing, then they really can decide in a matter of weeks because they won't do labeling discussions. So we can find that in a matter of weeks if it's negative. I would guess if it takes longer than a month, you're probably more bullish than bearish because, again, it's much easier to CRL than it is if right now they have to start entering labeling discussions. I think they would have already done them. But if they have to start into label discussions, then they would it would take time to get done with that. The stock, where would it go? I mean, like I said, it could go as high as $60, $70, $80 a share. The biotech tape is so bad. My base case is 50. And I love that I'm like in a daycare right now. It's pretty hard to work in this environment. I have 2 doors between me and the kids, and this is what we're listening to. It's not even the snap time. I think this is part of his, they're doing occupational therapy. And on the downside, it can go down a lot because they need capital. So this is the most interesting biotech setup I've seen in a very long time. Okay. Today's 8K comes 10 weeks after the earnings call. And I wouldn't expect the FDA necessarily to give them more negative feedback in the last 10 weeks. But I find it very hard to believe that the company amends the credit facility without having a good feeling about why that July letter was issued and that it wasn't necessarily a negative reason. 2, that there were 4 insider buys the day of earnings. 3, that the company was given another letter at the end of October, that the FDA would not issue that letter if they already had a CRL in mind. They would just CRL. why give the company time to respond to this second issue when you've already decided that this was a deal breaker with the product? It's possible for a complete response. It just doesn't seem probable to me. And finally, today's 8K, it's a legal document. If they had any inclination that there was something holding this drug up from approval, if the FDA gave them any notification, they would not have put that line in there. So yeah, I think it's a tremendous setup with a ton of risk, because yeah, it can go to $10 if it's CRL'd. That's the best way to look at it. 20 down, 20 up. My guess is it's a 85% chance of approval. That's kind of where I'm at with it, which is, contrary to what people think, because you get a deficiency letter that precludes marketing. Nobody's ever seen that approved before. But this is not that kind of situation. It missed its PDUFA date. Almost all of those hit their PDUFA date, like 95% of them, and got CRL'd. This market is so brutal. Where do you think the FDA was in the review process when they came across the deficiencies? Like, is this something they spot early on and they stop the review until they get an answer? Or is it something more towards the end? Oh, I think it's definitely towards the end, David. The PDUFA date was the 3rd week of August. And the letter came the last week of July. And then this letter came 3 months after the PDUFA date. So I think they're very much done with the review. The only question is, did something come up that was a deal breaker outside of this? And I should say, my buddy says that the law says that the company has to be notified of all deficiencies. So the fact that they have not been notified of any other deficiencies besides this is also bullish. Now, I don't know how you interpret that law, but that would again lead confidence that this is it. What are you looking for on the label? Chris, that's a great question. It's beyond my my pay grade. My buddy thinks that the label is going to be far better than expectations because there's more clinical data that came out since then. I think something called a merit trial, and the label will be more broad than people expect. So it can go up way higher. David, I think it's not going to go up that much because we are in the middle of a bear market right now. I mean, really? The biotech index is down 400 basis points right now today alone. It's like a slow motion crash. So every catalyst is sold off. The good news with this stock is that you have a really strong management team and board ownership, and they're not going to do dumb things with the stock, whether it's capital raises or what have you. I would guess if they really are precluded from getting full value, they would just sell the company versus do a very dilutive capital raise. They have not done those. They could have done them at any time, and they have not done them. They're clearly very bullish on their future. Any other questions here? So yeah, regarding timing, I think March should clear it. I mean, that's 10 weeks from now, 9 weeks from now. It shouldn't take the FDA more than a month. I would think not even 2 weeks to analyze the data that was resubmitted. So then the only question is, does something new come up? Does the FDA come back with more questions? They could definitely come back with more questions regarding what the company submitted. And then has there been labeling discussions? And if there hasn't been, how long do those take to resolve? And that could take four weeks. So there's always risk with options, because if you miss the options, I mean, the date, then you're screwed. I put on some Junes too, but most of them are March. Some June call spreads. This market is so brutal. I'm gonna hide it on my desk. Terrible day for me. All right, I think that's enough for that. Regarding Magnachip, I mean, you can't ask for anything more bullish. I basically posted my thoughts on Vic and Value Investors Club, and I am the only bull left, apparently. There's no one else on that message board that likes the stock. I I got a bunch of pushback. One guy who used to own it asked me about the future from a competitive standpoint without, just vaguely asking me, what do I think about competition? And then another guy just wrote a bunch of stuff that, had no teeth in it. He thinks it's 5 up, 5 down. That's what he said. 5 up, 5 down. Doesn't like management. And, I posted a long, thoughtful response and got no reply. Literally no reply. Oh, he said, he wishes me luck. I went back through the proxy in detail. And the bad news is that every single buyer that was a financial buyer was Chinese. I'm positive of that. Going through the language of where the time zones were, or where they visited, if they visited Beijing or whatever. There were 3 buyers that are unknown. One was party B, and they weren't involved for months, so I'm not going to include them. But it was party, I wrote this down somewhere. Let's see if I can find this. Party B, party F, and party G. Party F and party G are strategics, and they're of unknown origins. And one of them gave an indicated offer of $25 to $29 a share just 2 weeks before the deal was signed. And party G had just signed a non-disclosure agreement like 2 days before the deal was signed. Both are strategic. We have no idea what country they're from. None of this concerns me. I would have liked to have been a little more in the dark about at least one of the parties' origins, hoping it was American. We knew there was no Koreans there because the company told us in an 8K that there were no Korean bidders. So those strategics are either from America or they're from China. As I said in detail in my last YouTube, I think that there's a buyer for it. I'm not concerned that Korean buyers didn't show up in the last process. It just takes one buyer. I think the company is really attractive, and I think that they will be successful in finding a buyer for it. But I think the market's skeptical because if you go through the proxy, you'll see it was all Chinese buyers. And if it was all Chinese buyers, you ask yourself, why would there be a non-Chinese buyer now? And that's why you're trading at 19 bucks. The difference that I think is that, your setup is unbelievable here. The guy in Vic thinks there's 5 down. I don't, it's not based on anything. I think they'll do, like I said, north of $1.50 to $1.75 in earnings next year on what is a $11 stock price adjusted for cash. I also think that he, as well as all bears, are not approaching this correctly. $29 last March is not $29 today. It's just math. You got a $1.50 breakup fee. You'll have 40 cents accretion from the buyback. That alone is $1.90 that you did not have last March. So 29 is $27.10 just from that alone. You then need to discount that $27.10 either by the SMH or time value of money, or how about just 7% US dollar inflation? Pick whichever you want. But that $27.10 probably goes down to $24 to $25, if not lower, based on SMH. Of course, the market's imploding. So 29 is 25. Maisie? Which means that all you need to do is get a buyer to pay 25 in the last process, which would be paying 29 in today's process, and they're paying the same thing. There's no difference. It makes the hurdle much lower, and I think that's completely missed. New OLED customer, new European auto OEM customer, new fab relationship, sale processes, why I'm in, business prospects are looking good. Yeah, Glenn, I think bears would say that, management's just touting a bunch of, one-offs. And what about Samsung? Samsung might start pulling their business. And, Everybody thinks the boogeyman's out there for the company, and nobody believes that 2023 guidance. So that would be the pushback. But yes, I agree. You don't own it for the sale, but the sale is going to be the exit. I mean, everybody's aligned here. The CEO has most of his net worth in the stock. He's never worked anywhere else before or as a CEO. And other executives there have over 100,000 shares of stock. And they need an exit for shareholders and for themselves. And there needs to be a buyer. Don't get me wrong. There's no buyer, there's no buyer, right? And you can't do anything about it. But there's a lot going on here. The Korean government effectively blocked this sale, not the United States government. And the Korean government can strong arm somebody in Korea to, get rid of this situation if they wanted to. It's a rounding error for any strategic. And quite frankly, it's a good acquisition for a financial buyer. So it's not like we're talking about overpaying. If they paid $29 a share, and you take out at that point, then would be like $7 in cash, $7 or so. You're paying $23 for the business on something that should do next year, call it $1.60 in earnings, growing, and they could put leverage on it. You're paying like, low teens earnings multiple. It just, it's just not expensive. It's a great profile for an LBO, especially because they refuse to put any leverage on it in the public markets. So yeah, I love that Vic hates this. I can't overestimate that enough. This thing used to have hundreds of messages over the years. It was a darling, and the stock only went down. Now when it's finally near the exit, and the fatigue is so rich, there's nobody that wants to touch it. And great. That's what I couldn't ask for a better setup. God, this market is nasty. Just so nasty. All right, well, I am going to crawl under my bed and watch my portfolio implode. I'd love to hear some pushback on AXSM. I could do maybe another YouTube in a week or two. And you guys could try to come up with where my flaws are here. I mean, nobody knows anything. So, unless you're going to just point me to deficiency letters are bad and precluding the marketing is bad. I get all that. That's why the stock's, $29. That's your opportunity. I mean, that's the whole idea. That's how these things work. You got to have a lot of hair on a biotech if you're going to make any money on it. You're not going to make any money buying things that are easily approvable. And, that's what I think you got here. So I think the only reason why you have the opportunity right now is because this tape is so bad. I mean, I think this would be up 10% today if it wasn't for the tape. Casper. Oh my God, that's down another 3% today. I do not own any Casper. So last time I talked, I said I was intrigued by it. And thank God I sold it all for flat the day after. That was one of my few good decisions I made in the last few months and years. I think that is going to be amazing the next week, Casper. So the vote on Casper is tomorrow. And they obviously can't close until the vote happens. The vote's going to be a shoo-in. But then the company can say that we've delivered everything on our end. There's nothing else left to check off to close. So they can, within a certain number of business days, force the buyer to close. And we'll see if the buyer funds. I mean, you do realize that the day that the buyer takes control of Casper, they have to write down their position by 75 to 80%. That's a big bite to chew off. Losing, $300 million overnight for like some brand new private equity firm. Now, I don't know what their out is besides praying and hoping that Casper doesn't, take them to court, which they will, of course. But there's no price that I would buy Casper at, because there's no downside for Casper if the deal breaks. And it's very different than a strategic buying them. Let's say some other mattress company was buying Casper. You have a very different incentive to close then versus the lowest tier of a private equity firm. You can't really get any lower than this unless it was Chinese capital. I'm not saying that because of Magnachip. I'm just saying that generally speaking, that would be a more sketchy, buyer. I have been following loosely ESSC because of sheep. I see it's now down 25% today. It's very interesting, but no, it's not my thing. So I haven't been paying too much attention to it. The AXSM, I'm so intrigued by the stock. if it was fully marginable and it was having a better year, I would make it a 10% position, I think. Which is tremendous amounts of risk. Any other questions? Thoughts, comments? Casper. Wow. Casper is traded at 522 and is a 690 cash deal, and it could close as early as this week or next. Now, mind you, there's been no notification by the investors, the private equity firm, or the company that they have changed their mind or don't plan on closing. But I don't know why the private equity firm would be incentivized to disclose that to the company. We'll find out soon. It will go down as a pretty epic short write-up if it breaks. I mean, very impressive if it breaks. With help from the market. I mean, the market has just gotten worse and worse every day, which makes it harder and harder for them to want to close it. All right. With that, marketing period over for Casper. You mean from the debt financing? The debt financing is already secured, so there's no marketing for that. They know who's putting up the money for that. But most of the money is equity, and they have financing commitments. They have the LPs have already committed to the money. That doesn't mean that they're going to fund it, but the LPs are on the hook for legally as well. I would think. I don't know. They're called limited partners for a reason. So really, it's the private equity firm. I guess the private equity firm could go bankrupt. I mean, this is not my thing. Okay, I'm the wrong guy to ask about anything to do with the intricacies of a merger agreement. And if you go back to the 2008 crisis, plenty of private equity firms got out of deals even though they shouldn't have been able to. Penn National Gaming is one that comes to mind. So, just because a merger agreement's really tight doesn't mean that companies can't find a way, or financial buyers can't find a way to walk. In this case, Casper is going to go bankrupt if they can't get funding. And a quarter of the company is owned by insiders. So they're not going to go without a fight. And it's honestly one of the more interesting things I've seen in a long time. And I can't wait to see what happens. But I'd much rather see what happens without having any stake in it. I mean, Axsome seems way less risky to me, with way more upside, because that's going to zero, Casper, if the deal breaks. I don't even think a recut happens, because if you're the private equity firm, What are you going to pay? You're going to pay 5 instead of paying 690. I mean, like I said, it's probably marked down 80% the day you close. So either they're going to close on terms or they're not going to. I think a recut is extremely unlikely. I don't think the company will agree to a recut. All right. Everybody take care. The banks could say at the time of close the firm is bankrupt. That is usually in the credit agreements. That's true, except if you go through the proxy, all of this was disclosed. It was all disclosed. So they knew they needed money, financing in January and February to stay in business. And there's no reason to believe that the business has materially done worse than the expectations at the time of the proxy or when the deal was signed in November. So I don't think the bank could pull the financing. I don't think that'll work. That would be how the LPs can get out of it. The banks say that they are pulling the financing, but they're going to sue. I mean, Casper will sue the banks, saying this is all disclosed when we signed the agreement in November. This would be a very different situation if this was signed last summer and we were today looking at this. But that's just not the case. It was 2 months ago. And there's been no numbers that have come out. Contrary to what people said, I went through the proxy. They did not say business deteriorated in November and December in that proxy. I did not see that there. They notified the buyer a week before they signed the deal in mid-November, their updated Q4 guidance and their Q3 actuals, days or a week before they signed the deal. And there was no comment in that proxy that said that things got worse in the 4 weeks between the signing of the deal and the proxy coming out. Not that I saw. And by the way, the stock popped on the proxy and held the 660 till the short report came out. So I can assure you if there was something in that proxy that said business deteriorated to the point of insolvency, before this closes, and this was not known prior, an ARB might have picked up on that and not have made it go up on the proxy release, but down. So I feel pretty good about my reading of the proxy that no new information was disclosed that day. That doesn't mean that today things haven't gotten worse in the last 4 weeks, but we have no reason to believe that just because the stock market's gone down a lot. All right. I will see you the next time there is news on one of my names. I hope it's on Axsome getting approved, because that would be an epically good day for me. That's now my current biggest, kind of watch list thing. Magnachip's not going to have anything happen for a while, though I'm hoping we get more leaks in the Korean press in the coming months. But and I hope the stock market stops going down. Absolutely brutal. Everybody take care. Thanks, Glenn, for the kind words. I really appreciate it. Take care.